Yeah. Whoops.
So you were saying about, so we're talking about the olive orchards in this particular place in Catalonia, Spain, and how he lets the orchards stress themselves. He doesn't use pesticides or fertilizers, and he doesn't even water them so that the plants and the root systems remain robust instead of turning them into pansy uh, olive orchards. He lets them do their thing. And then when they harvest, they never touch the ground. They don't clean them. They don't do anything, which reminds me, a buddy of mine told me that you don't get skin cancer when you don't wash the oil off your skin. And you think about all the time humans have been in the sun and never had cancer that we know of like we do now. And it's because we're slathering our skin with, rubbing the natural oil out and putting fake oils back on our skin. And I guess the sun goes right through. And the idea that our natural oils protect us from the sun is interesting and not so different from the olive
Yeah,
situation.
that's a good comparison. I maintain that, that we as human beings, we have a remarkable resilience and we have a remarkable adaptability if we only give our bodies and ourselves that chance or opportunity. It's the same thing here. Um, as soon as it
Bring
gets,
your camera so your eyes are at about just that's probably a little bit closer. Yeah.
yeah, anyway, it's interesting that as soon as it gets really warm here, people need their air conditioning. And I know there is a threshold where things get extremely hot, but it's always amazing to me that in here where I live in Canada, it's very, very cold in the winter. And so everyone's wanting that summertime and the heat. Yet as soon as it's hot, people will retreat to an air conditioned mall or home, whatever. And for me, the body never gets to adjust. It's either adjusting to heat in the winter, or it's adjusting to cold in the summer. So that ability to see exactly what you actually can um,
Assimilate.
withstand or assimilate or integrate, that never happens
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you're literally putting yourself in an artificial environment all the time. So whether you're slathering on the artificial ingredients that are supposedly doing you some good, or putting yourself in a setting that is artificial, you're never giving yourself really the chance to find out what am I really like? What temperatures can I thrive under? What does my body do when this happens? I know some people who never sweat. They've never sweat because they're not it hasn't occurred to them, or it hasn't happened to them if it's very, very hot. They've never allowed themselves that. And yet the
Right.
sweat is getting rid of toxins in the body that is actually extremely healthy. You go and sweat and you'll take out all the toxins that you wanted to get rid of through pills and supplements and all the rest of it.
Yeah. The skin's the biggest eliminative organ, and washing those cells out or letting them rinse themselves or flush themselves is a huge component of all of this.
Well, I know the Dr. Hyman, Mark Hyman, is done a lot of research on the brain and the health of the brain and a healthy brain. And he presented a series not long ago. And it was his second component or second installment of the brain series. And he actually talks about sweating. And he talks about the need for this toxicity to leave the body in a very, very natural way. Because if it doesn't happen, or if there is a buildup, that's the way inflammation occurs. And inflammation is the number one cause of illness, is the number one cause of disease. So again, the body has all the means to withstand and actually heal itself in this way by warding off or getting rid of the toxins, etc. And unfortunately, the artificiality of our environment has led us in the opposite direction.
The idea that we know better than what nature's been doing for so very long.
Yeah, it's the same with our brain gut, or not the, well, there's a brain, our brain gut is, there's a brain in
I mean, nervous system, a
that are found
separate
there.
nervous system,
Pardon me?
a separate nervous system in the gut.
Yeah, brain, that it actually will also, through an indirect means, inform us if we allow it to. In other words, you have gut feelings, you have intuitive feelings. There are a lot of physical sensations that you feel in your stomach that actually are informant, they inform you of whatever your situation is. What I find very interesting as well is, again, if we go back to those oils and soaps and everything you use, the cleaning of ourselves has also led to the lack of dirt, or the lack of the presence of germs around us, which in fact feed into our system, feed into our stomachs, and allow us to have a healthy gut. A healthy gut, again, extremely important to our overall health. If we have cleansed to the point where we've imbalanced some of the germs, if you like, in our stomach, that they're no longer present, or they're diminished, and in fact they are necessary for a biobalance in our systems.
Right. Well, this is the lessons we're learning. It's just like taking, not only have to learn how to take care of our bodies naturally, we have to learn how to take care of the oceans naturally and get back on track. And the farther we get away from what's true or what's natural, the farther we get away from living life. And we think that we're going to outsmart this stuff, and we really need to go back to fundamentals a little bit.
Yeah, I mean,
Stuff works.
we had a very, for all intents and purposes, a very challenging winter and flooding in the spring. And yet when you look around you now, Jim, it's like heaven. Everything is blooming, the greenery, the color, the foliage. It's so dramatically lush that
Yeah.
it's like being in heaven. And for whatever reasons, yes, there is climate change, and things are changing weather-wise. I certainly won't deny that, but I still am so humbled by the fact that nature finds a way to be herself despite some very adverse elements.
And so instead of being in resistance to it, we just need to learn how to allow.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe that's part of the game.
And I think, well, nature is just there. It just is. There is no agenda. There's no, hey, I got to have this tree here and it's got to do this. And no, the tree's just there.
On the other hand, you do need to figure out how you ended up in Canada instead of down there in Florida.
Yeah, true. Well, don't worry. There'll be a plan. There'll be a journey. I meant to ask you about that article, I believe, on happiness that you sent me.
Yeah, I didn't actually read it. I sent it to you, but I didn't read it.
Yeah, because I haven't, it's been busy, busy, and just work busy, so I haven't got a chance to get to it. But I thought maybe if there was a line or a phrase or something that you found. I'm just trying to think if I did read something about it. I did read an article about happiness, and the gentleman in question was talking about the fact that searching for happiness is futile, which I agree. I mean, if we look at the nature of happiness as a moving target, it is all within us, and eventually we sort of come back to ourselves, just like we're coming back to the basics of nature. But he was maintaining that happiness really is a bit of a mirage. And he was maintaining that we can be quite fulfilled without needing it. And what I found conspicuously missing was the whole divine component, the whole aspect of there being something greater than we are, that somehow we are not only responsible, but we are the alpha and omega of our existence. And I find that was a little, I didn't find that particularly balanced in terms of an argument.
You know, I'm not sure that he's right about the idea of happiness, because I think we make assumptions about what we assume happiness is, that you walk around with a big silly grin on your face with an empty head or whatever. And, when I'm puttering around in the basement, for lack of a better expression, that's a man cave down there. I really enjoy what I do. And I think happiness is as simple as that. Now, I might be thinking about other things, but I'm working with my hands instead of my mind, you might say. I'm not writing, I'm not doing this and that. Maybe I'm measuring and cutting stuff, or still designing ideas in my head. But it's a great deal of pleasure to be down there, kind of out of my regular realm. And I'm not so unsure that isn't happiness. I'm not sure it's that complicated.
No, I don't think it is. Again, if we go back to, as we started this conversation, back to basics, the whole aspect of feeling good, and everyone's measurement of good is different. So there's no way to compare, because there's no sense in comparing. My idea of a good time is just kind of coming back from a run and it's warm out. Somebody else may think that is the biggest torture in the world. And again, there you go. There's the difference. But I think that the measure of happiness or contentment is having choice, Jim. You're having choice to be or to do what you desire. And the more choices there are in that context, I think the greater the probability will be that you'll feel content or fulfilled.
Well, when I'm downstairs, working in, I've got saws down there and whatever, I certainly have choices, because I could be doing things I need to be doing. I mean, I have a list of things down there that I'm installing a utility sink right now. I've done most of the copper. I need to do one more fitting, so I need to turn the water off again. But I have lots of choices, and this is what I choose to do. And maybe that's where happiness comes from, choosing what you want to do and then doing it, instead of being reactive to life or doing what you have to do, whether you want to or not.
Mm-hmm. It's. I have something, that I'd like to add to that. Choice too implies freedom. It implies a form of freedom, personal freedom. And what is interesting to me is some people, for whatever reasons, there's a story that occurs. We all have stories. We all have a story that we might experience, we live through, we attach ourselves to. And what I'm finding, because I'm finding there are examples, or I've listened to somebody or someone else telling about somebody else. And I think what happens is, when you are in your story, that story, if it gets out of hand, begins to control you.
Right.
And the larger the story, or the more time is spent on that story, more energy put into the story, the greater the confinement. It's as if you eventually put yourself into a box and say, no, I can't do that because I'm feeling this way, or because I experienced this, there's no way that I can now do that. And so out of that comes a creation of limitations.
So it's the maintenance of a persona that's false.
Yeah, or the idea that a story becomes your identity. You start mixing your identity with experiences, and instead of defining yourself by your essence, you start defining yourself by experiences. And for the most part, we tend to, as human beings, define our experiences that are the ones that are the unfortunate ones, or the dramatic ones, or the ones that have caused pain.
You know, what's funny is when I left the boat business, I was in the boat business for 14 years, and I never called myself a yacht broker until I came to Arizona because nobody knew what I was talking about selling big boats. But it actually took me close to 3 years to entirely divest myself of that persona of I was so involved in the boat world. I mean, I had a 40-foot sailboat and all that, which is big all by itself, but I lived and breathed boats for quite some time, and then next thing you know, I find myself in the desert, and that was quite a transition, and it did not happen overnight at all.
Yeah, yeah. And I
Yeah.
think similarly, if one we can take another example, which I think most of us have had, where you've been in a relationship and it ends, and there is a continuance of that relationship, whether there's a regret or a mourning or a loss, whatever word you want to put in that place. Again, there is an attachment there that sometimes takes a long while to get over. And sometimes the getting over is extremely difficult, or maybe it doesn't happen. One sits in that story. And I realize I'm the first to say that that's happened to me a couple of times, if not more, where sometimes your life is literally put on hold because there is a paralysis that erupts
Well, you,
out of this kind of thing happening.
well, you build patterns and habits that have emotion associated with them, whether they're right or wrong, and you try to extract yourself from them, and they're glued together by some really, I'll say, junky glue. Uh, I remember a relationship took 2 years to get over it. You know, that's the old days. You know, that doesn't happen anymore. But and there's a lot of emotion mixed in with it, and it's quite the event to discover what you don't yet know.
Yeah, yeah. And it's usually in times like that that the discoveries are made, in
Right.
terms of, because the comfort level has been totally knocked off balance. So you're in a situation where you're so uncomfortable, whether it's emotionally or otherwise, and so that demands some kind of change. And then in comes the change, and sometimes the universe is already, kicking you in the behind and saying, come on, you're meant to move forward out of this. You're meant to push yourself over here. And I don't know, but I've found that if I'm staying in a certain paralysis, eventually I get knocked out of there, by virtue of another event or another happenstance that again is unexpected, is sometimes dramatic, but it's, as I say, it's almost like the universe saying, get on with it. You're meant to be evolving some more. And that isn't that what we're up to on this planet?
Well, you know what's interesting is this particular relationship, and it goes back to 1997 or thereabouts, the end of 1997. And, you know, everything was right, but it wasn't. And, but in that, so the patterns and habits were built in the relationship and it wasn't working. And when I extracted myself from it, however it was that occurred, from the traumatic event, my patterns and habits were shattered, if you will, And that is the time that you rebuild them
Yeah.
because they've been knocked out of order, whether they were good ones or bad ones. All of a sudden, you've got daylight, and of course, normally you're feeling your pain, but it's when these traumatic events occur that you have the freedom to rebuild your patterns and habits. And actually, as soon as that breakup, I remember when I can still remember parts of it. Um, but I actually sat down and journaled, and that's what actually caused me to journal. I
Hmm.
journaled for 2 years, and right after that, Visionaries Thrive in All Times came out. But the journaling was something I was able, well, the trauma and the patterns and habits breaking down gave me the freedom to build new patterns, and I did it through the journaling process, which eventually became a series of 5 books, and that is where it started.
Yeah.
I was lost there for a while.
Yeah. Well, similarly, I went through, and it causes there's a certain personal search that erupts. You're not searching when you're content or when you're in a status quo situation that's comfortable.
Right.
You do start searching, unless you're, at the point where you're self-medicating because the pain is too much. But generally, a self-search is one that happens when you realize that the way you are or were because of the shattering is no longer the person you want to be, or you realize you weren't meant to be. And I think that awareness is huge. It's as if you come face to face with yourself and you go, oh my goodness, was I really this way? Did I really do this? And these are not, right and wrong actions. They're not judgments here. They're simply you being a human being and perhaps being who you were. But that reckoning that comes, and then the awareness is massive. And out of that, as you've said, you rebuild. You are actually moving to another level, whatever that level is going to be for you on your journey as a human being.
Well, when that relationship breakup occurred, and um, what I did was I ended up going to journaling, and journaling was a self-medicating. Self-medicating doesn't have to be bad. Self-meditating could be, or pardon me, self-medicating can be jogging. It can be healthy things. But in that breakup and breaking up my patterns and habits, going to journaling, and that's where I really explored and discovered what I had, what I wanted, where I wanted to go, and doing journaling in a third party persona gave me a lot of freedom to explore. And then one day the first book came out, and then I was off and running again.
Yeah,
Uh, it's interesting to watch it occur.
yeah. And yet, when you are in the moment, in the throes of dealing with whether it's a job loss or an ended relationship or a health challenge, there is an immediate sense of abandonment. A universal. You feel as if the world has abandoned you. You feel very alone, and I think that is an initial reaction, which then as time goes on, at least in my case, I remember knowing and thinking, the idea of being alone or being in solitude is a prerequisite to personal change. The hanging out with self is the modus operandi self uh, to self-awareness and self-change.
Yeah, that introspective component that we all get driven to or dropped off at now and then.
Yeah. And again, this with our world being the way it is, the 24/7, the on button, the relentless communication that is actually a non-communication. It's simply just a plugging in, a plugging into what? Nowhere, a plugging into whatever. That that kind of preoccupation is so de-energizing. It's taking such a toll. And unfortunately, the idea of being alone or using a solitude as a form of self-care, self-help, self-improvement, unfortunately doesn't stand a lot of a chance in today's world.
Well, and so there's the makers and there's the breakers. Now, I just made that up and I don't know what it means, but the idea is that some people rise to the surface or rise up to meet the occasion. It makes them stronger. And I suppose the game is they have that verve and that willingness to get beyond it. And then you've got a different type of crowd that more languishes in the difficulty. And there's your difference. It's not that one's better than another, but one party will accomplish a great deal more than another in their lifetime because they have that wherewithal to take it as in part and parcel as part of life and process it and address it and go on. And lots of people languish. I was working with a client right now. In fact, I see her in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
She's 40, and her big problem is her dad. I mean, she's still caught up in her mom dying quite a while ago, and her dad manipulates her, and she's 41 years old, and she's still caught up in all that.
Yeah.
And I'm very pleased that she and I are speaking, and there's with help, people can even faster jump through the hoops to get back on the horse, if you will. But everybody does it at their own rate and speed, and some people in their lives accomplish more than others, and there's probably a relationship there.
Yeah, I would think so. I think the story, again, it goes back to the idea of what you are versus your story, that you step out of what has been expected of you, what has been told to you, how you have been conditioned. And some people are powerful. Again, no right or wrong. For whatever reasons, they have a great command over others, whether it's a family member or a co-worker, or whether it's a team that somebody's on. Could be a bunch of CEOs together, but for whatever reason, some emerge as dominant, and in some ways they're great leaders, and in other ways they can be detrimental to someone who has a different kind of personality and capacity in terms of their evolution. That they're not needing somebody to bark at them, they're needing somebody to be compassionate. So that I think a very wise person is someone who is able to appreciate the person they're with in whatever capacity, and then can adapt their personality or the way they are with them so that other person feels comfortable, is able to respond to some kind of, whether it's advice or guidance. That to me is a profoundly wise and generous person.
Well, because there's a part of me wants to say, first, ultimately, what happens is we're all a match for each other to the degree that we are, and that person with the compassion may not be the person you expect it to be, and it may not even be yourself. And that's kind of the beauty of it. Everybody stops and picks up everybody else. It doesn't really go like that, but there are people that are a match for the different things other people need. But my world says to be that for everybody is really difficult. And
Yeah, what I'm saying is not that the compassion is one attribute, that maybe someone is here who has it and has a lot of it, and
yeah,
and they in their journey become somebody who drops in. I like the way you use that term, Jim, where you drop in on the life of somebody else, and even you don't necessarily know why you suddenly get to know this person or are in their life. But that is to me, the magic and mystery of living life. That nothing is truly predictable. And so if you happen to meet somebody in a coffee shop, and the next thing you know, you're getting together again, and you realize there's some kind of synergy there, etc. But why that has happened or where it may lead to, that's part of the adventure.
well, and in a this is probably a really poor analogy, but what I'm trying to suggest is that we all have different kinds of compassion. We all find who and what we're a match for as far as helping each other. And at the same time, if I were to come up upon a serious automobile accident, I happen to know, especially if there's any other kind of help, that and sometimes you simply become obligated to show up. But
Mm-hmm.
I know from my youngest sister who did trauma hospital, road and ambulances. A regular doctor at a bad automobile accident is no help.
Mm-hmm.
It's a certain kind of person that is effective in those kind of environments,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just the same. Like, how is it that you match up when you met? Like this woman that comes up from Tucson, and we spend some time talking. How is it that becomes the match? And actually, the things that we talk about are a huge match to her. In
Mm-hmm.
other words, you don't just go out and dispense, compassion to people. I mean, we all do, but there's a magic where when we hook up with people and become, so I want to say, our brother's keeper. There's a magic that's part of it for it to actually work, instead of mind driving, just go do it. And because that's when you get in trouble. You do it because you're supposed to do it. That's the analogy I'm trying to build here. But you
Mm-hmm.
do it when it comes naturally, and there's a chemistry or a magnetism or something that actually, I'm treading on dangerous territory here trying to describe something, but um,
But the fact of the matter is, and it is a case where so and so happened to be on the scene of this and that and the other, and so who was on the scene happened to have the expertise to, lift the car or dive into the water or whatever the emergency may have needed.
right.
That's a drastic or an extreme example, but I think it's as simple as standing in a checkout line. Somebody's behind you, and you don't have the extra 50 cents to make up whatever your grocery is, and the person behind you says, "Hey, I can give you 50 cents."
Right.
Because that person behind you can just as well ignore your situation totally and say, "Oh yeah, she could use debit," you know.
And
And
a
so,
lot of people do, but the magic is when not even intuitively, it just comes to you to do it. And that's what I'm trying to differentiate, is when it just comes to you to do it versus doing it because you're supposed to.
yeah.
And we do that too, and even that can be rewarding, but the real magic is when it just comes out of the person's mouth without even thinking, hey, here's the 50 cents. Here, I've actually bought people's groceries, not because they're broke or this or that, or paid for something, not because they're broke, but just, it just happened. I just did it.
Yeah. And
Not for a reason.
and it is, yeah, there's an impulse, and whether you talk about that impulse in you, it is a proven fact that all human beings have a capacity to help. They have a capacity to feel for someone who is suffering. That is an innate uh, essence about us, which again, you wonder, where have our basic, why is it that our basic natures have undergone such transformations to the point where we don't know ourselves? We're artificial, just like we spoke about at the beginning of this conversation. There's a washing out of what is natural. And to me, that sometimes is a programming that's going on, that if we look at it, it's important to question it. It's important to go, why?
So we learn how to do what intuitively drives us instead of the mind version of what we should be doing, especially the term should be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, because when you get down to first principles, and you have them, you have that choice. The choice is important. You have the freedom to either say yes or no, or I'm going to give you the 50 cents or I'm not. But that is so powerful. Look at the power you have as a human being to influence the situation of another human being.
I'll give you an example that I was busy. I was in a grocery store and I was returning a DVD movie. And I was in a bit of a hurry, and there's some people in front of me, and you'd like to see people go to their cell phone or their computer and they order the movie out of Redbox, and then they just hit their card and they pick up the movie and they're gone. Well, other people will sit there and look through all the movies while you're waiting.
Okay.
And they look and they look and they look and they look and they don't find what they're looking for. And finally, I said to these people, "What movie are you looking for?" And they said, "So and so." And I said, "Well, here it is right here." So all they had to do was get out of the way. I put the movie back in and they got it. And that's what magic looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And
Because it just happens.
that's right. That is right. It just happens. And that's that's natural. That's what we want to find ourselves back to, is that scale of synchronicity, harmony, and order that is truly magical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And learn how to be guided and learn how to open our mouth when guidance, or just, it's funny, like the 50 cents when you're in line in a grocery store. The person doesn't necessarily say, here's 50 cents so you can get out of the way. It's more a type of they're in a state of gratitude on their own, and an appreciation, and it becomes an obvious place where they can mix in the world and contribute, making a better place, and they do it 50 cents at a time.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And it's a worthy study to figure out how to find yourself in a spot like that, or learn how to let that happen, so that you can be the recipient of the experience of giving somebody 50 cents.
Well,
Not
yeah. The recipient is, I mean, they talk about somebody who is a giver as being highly selfish, because the act of giving floods your system with endorphins. You feel very well after giving. And again, look at how nature is so bountiful that it's given you all the apparatus you need and could possibly want in allowing yourself to feel good all the time.
And when you feel good all the time, you express all the time, and then you're expressing in a useful manner.
Yeah.
I There's an expression, there's a woman by the name of Dahani Wahu. She's a Cherokee medicine woman who is also a Buddhist, a Buddhist priest.
Hmm.
And one of her expressions is, we have a duty. In fact, I was talking about this an hour ago. We have a duty to put thought forms of happiness into the atmosphere. And you can do it. You can do a mind version of that, or you can learn how to let go and let the universe express through you, for which, the flowers shower. And of course, flowers showering, that's a book by Osho. We're talking about Zen parables. And when Buddha would walk through orchards, the blossoms would etherically shower, just walking through. And that's what we want to learn how to do, is be happy. We want to learn how to, I say, not be happy, discover happiness, and put thought forms of happiness into the atmosphere, and let the flowers shower.
Yeah, it's as if your ability to think good thoughts they will reverberate. It's like a boomerang effect. When that happy thought goes out, whatever it might be, there's generally going to be some kind of an effect or a response, just the same as there is when a not so happy thought goes out.
Well, we're building a bank, in the etheric realm of thought forms of happiness. And that's not mind driven, that's that letting go, where you let that inner part of you out, and you've learned how to find what's true about yourself and let it express. And we build savings accounts, not for ourselves, but for the species, by contributing thought forms of happiness, and um, leaving trails of leadership. We learn how to let go and let what's naturally inside of us out, and it starts to build its own consensus and get into my world, and it becomes exponentially contributive. And
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like it's an aggregate of good thoughts, good actions, all totaling together, all coming together, and it makes living a lot easier, even when you have challenges. And this is the thing I'd like to underscore here. It's not as if either one of us or both of us has gone through a life of ease and relaxation, and so it's easy for us to say all this. It's
it
not.
has nothing to do with ease. No.
Yeah.
It's something we earned, though.
Pardon me?
It's something we earned.
Yeah. But it is interesting that the sense of ease that one feels in living a more option-filled life where happy thought forms go out, getting to that state, allowing that to morph and happen, is your journey, is the challenge, is the process. It's not send away for your instructions. You get your instructions, and when you go through them, because that's a totally mind processed way, it's so removed from that kind of system of arriving at a sense of contentment and being and being grateful.
Well, it's got to be something that you want and are willing to look for and look for and look for, and trial and error until you start to find it. And then it's like you've got this big, wide, all these different options, and eventually it kind of becomes one option, and that's truth or alignment with source, or it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
There's a million ways of getting there, but the closer you get to it, the more similar it looks. And it is a letting go process. And first thing you got to do is figure out who you are so that you can learn how to let go. And as you learn how to let go, what becomes true becomes available.
Yeah, it's it's a very the fact of the matter too is that self-acceptance at whatever stage you're at, self-acceptance is crucial. One can assume or think, oh, I need to have this. I need to have taken this course. I need to have traveled here. I need to earn a little bit more money, whatever the need is, to then assume, oh, I'll get there when I have all these things. And that's a misnomer, because one can get to what we're speaking about from whatever level one's at. You could be an unimportant person in the community. You could be someone who doesn't have family. You could be someone who has been told that you'll never amount to anything. And yet it is precisely those people that perhaps have the greatest window, because of what they've been through, to be able to find that state.
And don't forget, everybody has that potential, but some people it's closer to the surface and they're more driven to have it than others. And this experiment that this big blue ball out in the middle of space, for which we have an opportunity if we're willing to do what it takes. The exploration is interesting, the journey is interesting, and the results are basically unknown, but truly some of us are driven to have more, and we're willing to go beyond the norm to find out what that is. And frankly, a component of that is that sense of happiness, that sense of joy, that sense of knowing that what they're looking for is out there and they're on the trail of it, come hell or high water.
Yeah, yeah. There's
Learn.
the idea of being curious, however that manifests, about yourself, about others, about the world. Usually there's some kind of door you want to open. And it could be an innocuous door. It could be, oh, I want to be a chef and I really want to get to cooking school, which in and of itself doesn't represent anything dramatic or anything that's going to be even life-changing. However, that seed in you that is compelling you to want to be a chef, that's not a coincidence. That's in you. That is part of your essence. And all of us, I think, have these kind of moments of clarity where we want to do something or be something. We really don't know how we got that notion into us, but that notion is in us. And the fact that we are the ones that have thought of that, really, that's the miracle. Because if you act on all these notions that are coming to you, chances are you're going to eventually get to a point where you will be content, because you're answering to your essence. You're answering to the notion of self-evolvement.
Well, in part, it's like learning how to listen to yourself. And the more capably you listen, which in fact is as much letting go as it is anything else, you discover when you have insights to say, I want to be a chef, and you go to chef school or you work on that project and then discover, well, I don't really want to be a chef. And you go back and you look at that intuitive hit that you had and find out how pure it was versus how much of it was driven by your dad thinks it'd be great if you were a chef. And so as we learn how to listen, we eventually discover the purity of our insights, because we go off on these paths and discover they don't always work, even though it seemed like they should. But it turns out it was a bit of a convoluted message that we drove off on. And that's part of the process, is learning how to discover what our intuition tells us by actually following it and seeing what happens, and then going back and revisiting, well, what did that insight actually feel like? And actually, how pure was it? But that's the process.
Yeah. The other aspect to that chef school example is, yes, you went to chef school, and it may be that you realized that the school wasn't for you, but you met someone
Hmm.
at chef school and you embarked on some kind of a retail project. You've invented a new type of sauce that led you to be more of a business person. That's what you were really keen on, not working in the kitchen, but perhaps inventing of food or sauce of some sort that allowed you then to succeed with your business acumen.
So, you make a really good point, because I was suggesting that we learn how to effectively listen, we learn how to find that intuitive insight, and so we go off on that and follow it. And yes, there's constantly new insights that guide us. And while it seemed like chef school was it may very well not be it, but it got you off of what you were on, such that you could get closer. And yeah, then you hand off again, and you discover you're on a yacht, or you discover that you're a business person with a new kind of Jinsu knife or
Yeah,
something, or
whatever it
a
might be.
pocket magician, or some kind of little fishing pole, or
Yeah,
who knows what. And hopefully what isn't driving you is the need to get paid, because that's all mind driven.
yeah,
You won't find any. There are more people that are wealthy that, what do you think your midlife crises are about? People doing what they think they're supposed to do. And by the time they're in their 40s, they're kind of at a dead end. But their whole life is wrapped up in the creation of what they're supposed to be. But ultimately, the point is, we can get an insight and we follow it. And if we're careful, we can find new insights which take us closer, or take us wherever they take us. And in the end, we want to be able to go back and look at those insights and see how pure they were as it relates to what we ended up with, or
yeah,
the next stepping stone in the journey.
yeah. Sometimes it's as if you do layer yourself in order to then delayer. And again, the layering may be the result of, as you've said, others speaking or other stimuli that have effective decisions on your part. And unbeknownst to you, they're not actually your decisions. They are, you thought they were your decisions, but as you delayer,
Societies.
you realize, oh my goodness, this isn't me at all. And
And I wasn't listening very carefully,
yeah, I wasn't listening to what myself, and I was telling me.
or at
Yeah.
least we.
We, however many there are.
Yeah, well, this is that introspective journey that we all have to take, and this is ultimately where happiness comes from. Now, nobody says it's easy, and nobody says happiness is easy, or even being happy is easy. I mean, I've been out on a boat in really wild conditions, and I will tell you, I was might even have been scared. Or I had
Hmm.
a situation once. I was in the dark, and the anchor had gotten over the bow of the boat, and we are halfway between Florida and Cuba, and at 45-pound CQR and about 8 feet of chain, it was banging the hull of the boat, the bow, and I thought I pinched two fingers off. I looked up and I couldn't even tell. I went back to doing what I was doing, because it was all heavy stuff, and I was up there by myself. And I'll never forget that. Was I happy? I was scared, but I was doing what I wanted to do. I was loving my life like nobody's business. And I don't need to tell the story too often, but it's true. I couldn't tell if I had hurt myself, and I had no choice but to go back. Water's pretty deep out there when you're halfway between Florida and Cuba.
I think so.
Yeah. I think we've had a good time here. It's 4 o'clock. I have a
Yeah,
client.
Yeah,
And,
and I've got to go too. So I think it's gone well. Are you happy with that? Are you
I'm
happy?
happy with that. Speaking of
Yeah,
happy, we just made it all up and we're happy.
that's right. We just went ahead,
I
just
think
did what
that's
we
it.
do. That's it. And we have a good week. Are you in for, let's see, next week is, I have a feeling I won't be around because, yeah, it's,
The second,
the first is Canada Day and the second is Mike's birthday, so I won't be around. So I'll
well,
tell you
you
all
just,
about it the week after, if you
all
want.
right, let's do that.
Yeah, the
Let's
9th.
do that.
Take care, good stuff with your client. I think that's so
Yeah,
nice when you're acting as a mentor in that regard. It's great.
yeah.
Our, yeah. All right. All good things.
Have a great day. Have a great evening.
Yeah, I will. Take
All
care.
right. See ya.
Bye.
Bye bye.